Welcome back to another episode of the Commander Experience podcast. I'm one of your hosts. I'm Brian.
And I'm Jacob. Today we are going to talk about one of our personal commanders, where we're going to go through some of the cards and what makes the deck tick, and how we build the deck.
Let's break it down. So for today's episode, we are gonna cover my oldest deck, and actually the very first episode of the Commander Experience podcast. It's my Muldrotha deck. It's episode 1, and some of you might already seen that episode. But as you also know, if you watch that episode, my Muldrotha deck have seen so many variations and so many cards during the years, and it's still the deck that gives me the biggest headache, to be honest, because in some ways, I actually think Muldrotha is dead regarding Bracket 4, because he's 6 mana, and that's just so hard to swing, I think. So that is definitely one of the deck's weaknesses, I think, but we're going to go into details about that later on. So, yeah, it's giving me some headaches, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about how can I bring this deck into a Bracket 4 environment. How are we going to solve that big question? Is it even viable? And I think it was you, Jacob, that actually said that maybe there were a version of the Muldrotha deck where you can play Turbo. I was doing a lot of thinking around that, maybe playing some Dark Rituals and Grim Monolith and trying to rush it out there and win from that position. But the question I had to answer before doing that was, but how does it then actually win? Because if you don't have any cards in your graveyard, how are you then winning? You have to have all the cards in hand. So my solution to this was lean heavily into the self-milling part. And I've done this earlier, but I didn't have any way of exploiting the graveyard, meaning that if you don't have Muldrotha in play, you don't really take advantage of all the cards in your graveyard. And I still don't, because Muldrotha is still the combo piece. I'm not playing Muldrotha until I'm trying to win. But what I'm doing now is leaning heavily into the creatures that mill 3 cards or 4 cards and put value into your hand straight away. So a card I could mention here is one of the newer ones and one of the better ones. It's Town Greeter, and just to read it real fast, it costs 1 and a green. It's a 1/1 human citizen. When this creature enters, mill 4 cards. You may put a land card from among them into your hand. If you put a town card into your hand this way, you gain 2 life, so that part is not really doing anything in my deck. But what it does essentially is putting 4 cards into your graveyard and help fixing your colors, or maybe make sure you hit your land drop for the turn. But what it also does, and what I've done now, is I'm leading a bit heavily into Gaia's Cradle in this deck. So by playing a lot of these 1 or 2 mana creatures that mills you and put cards into your hand, you're now also making your Gaia's Cradle stronger for each creature that hits the battlefield. And by this sense, by turn 5 and 6, pretty reliable. You have enough cards in your graveyards and enough lands in play that you're in a position to try and win turn 5 and turn 6. And I've goldfished this quite a lot, and it does it pretty reliable, I would say. I would say 8, 9 times out of 10, I'm in a position to try and win on turn 5 or turn 6 this way. And one of the cornerstones also is Ice-Tail Explorer, for 2 reasons. I really think this is a good card for this build, but I also think it's a good card in general. And running the Lotus Cobra and Tireless Provisioner in the deck, you're in a position where if you tutor Ice-Tail Explorer into play early, not only are you having the landfall effect where you mill every time a lands come into play and filling the graveyard, you also make sure with your fetch lands that you're hitting your land drops, and you can now also play an extra land. And with a Lotus Cobra in play, this is one of the ways I can make a lot of mana turn 5, turn 6, and try to win. So yeah, that is one of the cornerstones in the deck, I would say. And when I'm trying to win, that usually happens with Displacer Kitten and Lionside Diamond, creating infinite mana. but I also run cards like Thassa's Oracle, and I've actually never played this card in the deck before, but I actually also added a Walking Ballista now, because with infinite mana, I can put all the counters I will on Walking Ballista, and what I really like about this is that sometimes, it is rarely, but sometimes I can only produce the infinite mana, and people may have a One Ring in play. We actually seen many games where there's 2 One Rings in play, but with Walking Ballista, I can keep the counters on it and just do it on the upkeep or something like that. Thassa's Oracle, of course, will just win you the game straight up, but sometimes you don't have all the cards you need in your graveyard, so I like to have several of these cards that can just win me the game when I play them.
Yeah, I actually really like that inclusion because it's also a permanent from the graveyard that can be played to win.
Yeah.
It helps a lot.
That was just a little bit about the core game plan. Aftermath, Analyst, and Lumra are 2 of the big cards regarding getting a lot of mana and trying to win with big mana on turn 5, turn 6.
Yeah, I think my first thought when I looked out the list was actually and I think you covered it pretty well, but I'll mention it anyway. The 2 mana creatures you mentioned, that ETBs and mills and that. I'm very interested to see how that works out. For me, it's so foreign to basically play what I would call a bunch of bad cards. My first thought was, I don't know, include more tutors to find Hermit Druid instead, or insert value pile creatures, so Orcish Bowmaster or Fairy Mastermind, all these kind of creatures. So it's interesting to see what these creatures does. I guess one of the big upsides of it, if you are a Gaia Cradle deck, is that no one is going to shoot your Tongue Reader. So you will have the creature in play.
Yeah, and it's funny you should mention that, because that was actually one of my first thoughts, because I love Hermit Druid, and one of my first thoughts were actually just, why am I not just only playing Hermit Druid and mill my deck and then run Lightning Greaves and Haste Enablers and so many creature tutors that you can do this pretty reliable? But what I came back to was actually, but how am I going to generate the mana to take advantage of all the cards in the graveyard with Muldrotha? Because Muldrotha is still 6 and Kitten is still 4. So that's a lot of mana I need in order to try and win. And I do think that if you're going the Hermit Druid route, that now it's no longer a Gaia's Cradle deck, because all of your cards is just going to be in the graveyard and your whole game plan is going to be get Hermit Druid in play. Also making it way more predictable to play against. And when you play in a private pod where you play against the same people over and over again, people are pretty fast going to catch up to, hey, he's going to play Hermit Druid in a second, or every time I play a creature tutor, you know what I'm going to get. I do think this way it flies a bit more under the radar. I still have the Hermit Druid in place to make that play that you're talking about, but it's also a bit more concealed because I'm doing all the other stuff, and I think that's an upside.
Yeah, definitely.
But I'm not sure.
Yeah, it is interesting because we have talked about this many times, but we build decks so differently. Like, my list will probably be 30 cards different, almost. So it's very interesting to see your choices here. Because when I think of Gaia's Cradle, I immediately think of all these value creatures, Gilded Drake and all of that, where let's just play all the best ones and then they also give mana. So I'm very interested to see. But I will say that I have played mill decks myself, or decks that want to mill themselves, and it's kind of tough to mill yourself in currently. So this might be the solution. And if you can turn the mill into mana as well.
Yeah, because the deck is kind of trying to do 2 things at once. It's both want to be putting cards into the bin, and you also want to be playing creatures for your Gaia's Cradle. And what I found out is that because I have done that, which you talked about, where I play the Baleful Strixes and the Gilded Drakes that you talked about, but it doesn't really support the other part of your plan where you want to be putting stuff into your graveyard. So, and I think you might notice if you look very close at my list is also that I pretty much removed all card draw from this deck.
Yeah.
Because what I found out was that if you want to lean heavily into the self-milling part, you can really do both. You can really both be drawing cards and putting stuff into your graveyard. Not if you want to be running some interaction and some tutors and all the other stuff that you need in order for the deck to function well. So I was like, is that really what I'm going to do? Remove all card draw? It seems so bad. And I do think I will run into some games where I will miss that card draw. But I also think that I will have a lot more games where I have so many cards in my graveyard that it will just be an overwhelming amount of mana I can create, and now I have the secondary hand in my graveyard, as we are familiar with graveyard decks does.
Yeah, and in some ways because that was one of my things when I looked at it was, is there actually not the card draw part, but more, is there enough outlet for the mana that you gain from a Gaia's Cradle? And when I looked at it, I was like, I don't know. But Muldrotha is kind of like this, where it also helps you use the mana and also, as you said, like repeat stuff. So in some ways he can draw you cards and also be able to use the mana. It'll be interesting to see though if there is enough, because that's what my question though is there enough things to repeat, or are you even interested in that? Are you just playing him to win immediately, or?
Yeah, I'm not repeating that much in this deck, and that's actually a thing I found out years ago, or maybe not years ago, but definitely a year or two. This has been on my mind, is that you can no longer play Muldrotha for value. That those days are over. You're playing Muldrotha as a combo piece now. I'm pretty sure that Muldrotha can't be played in any other way. It's only a matter of how are you using him as a combo piece. If you are looping any sort of cards, I think it's something like sacrificing a Lumra and playing him again, all the mana, something like that. So yeah, I haven't been looping any sort of cards in Muldrotha for a long time, because I don't think you have time to do those sort of things.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, because I think it's a bit of an interesting combination where you are kind of low on the card draw, and I know the mill does way up for that. But at the same time, when you're low on the card draw, I was like thinking, okay, the compensation is that you can play Muldrotha and then repeat stuff, but it doesn't seem to be able to do that. So it'll be very interesting to see.
Yeah. And by playing all the 2-mana creatures that enters and mills, you also have this the hidden tech, where now I can play Diabolic Intent, much more reliable. There's also the hidden tech of playing Calling Ritual in this deck, and that's also like pseudo ramping me when I have those creatures in play, because now maybe I can play Calling Ritual and make like 12, 14 mana or something like that. And now trying to win, because now the creatures have already done their work. They've already milled some cards into the graveyard, and maybe I've been lucky enough to hit an early Displacer Kitten and Lotus Petal or something like that. And now I can just try and go for the win with Calling Ritual. And I also think that for large archaeologists, I actually think this is sort of a hidden tech in the deck also, because like the other ones that are putting lands into your hand, this one mills free card, and then I can put a non-creature, non-land card from among the mill cards into my hand. And this just, in my in my eyes, reads Lion's Eye Diamond all over it. So milling free cards and putting a Lion's Eye Diamond in hand, maybe just a value card like, I don't know, Animate Dead or Amulet of Vigor, or
one of the tutors.
One of the tutors. There's so many cards that is just helping me. And like I said, I goldfish this deck a lot. And the times I've been goldfishing this deck, and one of my early plays of milling 3 or 4 cards and putting a land into hand, where I actually hit that Gaia's Cradle and put that into my hand. So they're maybe not tutors, but milling 3 or 4 cards like 2 turns in a row is pseudo drawing you into Gaia's Cradle in many games.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're doing more work than you actually think. And what they're also doing very excellent is making sure you hit your land drops, making sure you're color fixing, and they're also setting you up for Aftermath, Analyst, and Lumra. So now you have lands in your graveyards. So when they enter and trying to get lands back into play, maybe with a Lotus Cobra or something like that on the battlefields, you're just set up to play Muldrotha very fast all of a sudden. And I think that will take some opponents by surprise, how fast this is going to generate mana.
Yeah, I think it will generate a lot of mana. That's also one of my next questions, because my thought immediately when I saw basically, or thinking about the Gaia's Cradle thing where you get this much mana, and especially with Muldrotha at the head of the deck, my head went immediately to Eternal Witness or other card that returns cards from the graveyard, so you can not necessarily loop it, but if you tap a Gaia's Cradle for 15 mana and then play your commander, and you could play Eternal Witness and return a tutor, I think you basically won the game at that point. I don't know if it's just unnecessary. What do you think about it?
You're not wrong. And I have had many of these cards in mind, to be honest. Both the Noxious Revival and one of my favorite pet cards in that sense is Nostalgic Dreams. But I keep coming back to, if I play Lion's Eye Diamond and discarding my hand, I know I can play the Eternal Witness out of the graveyard, but I'm usually not going to do that because either I'm one, in a position where I can try and win, and I'm never going to play the Eternal Witness out of the graveyard. I'm going to play Displacer Kitten or something like that.
Yeah.
Or two, I'm not going to play the Muldrotha because he's a combo piece and play the Eternal Witness out of the graveyard. So the other situation is where I'm not cracking the Lion's Eye Diamond and I'm just playing the Eternal Witness to get a tutor back. I'm not sure if that's something I want to be spending my time on, because it's usually going to be the whole turn. And if it's a tutor like, let's say, Finale of Devastation, do I now then have the mana of both playing the Eternal Witness and playing the Finale of Devastation? So
yeah,
it's more of... I don't think it's an exclusion as much as it is a way of me including another card instead of the Eternal Witness.
Yeah.
And also, I think right now it's a conscious choice of me trying to exploit Ice Still Explorer, because playing the lands out of the graveyard is going to generate me so much mana. So now I can get Muldrotha in play and trying to win. It's kind of split up between two plans, if you can say that. There's the Guy's Cradle route where I have these creatures in play and can generate mana this way, but there's the other part where I have the Aftermath, Analyst, and Lumra and can generate mana that way. And then there's kind of the third route where you have squandered resources in play early and can maybe sacrifice your lands and bring them back with Lumra and generate mana in this way. So I'm not sure if that actually answered the question regarding the Eternal Witness. I'm just thinking that the deck is set up right now in a way where I really want to lean heavily into trying to create big mana. And when I first have big mana, either if it's by Gaia's Cradle or an Aftermath, Analyst, Lotus Cobra effect, then I'm going to try to go for the win. And I won't really be using my time or cards or getting cards back from the graveyard unless it's for me trying to win the game.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, it might be one of those things where you don't need to take the extra steps. You can just win instead of trying to do this whole dance where you take back Eternal Witness and do stuff.
Yeah.
It's just my head just goes back to repeating again, because that just feels like that's what you do when you play not only Muldrotha but also the graveyard in general.
Yeah, and I think we can make like 10 episodes and talk about Muldrotha, about what you can do and how you can make this deck work, because I do think it's one of the biggest open-ended commanders you can do. You can even do Super Friends if you want to do that. There's so many routes you can take, and like I said, that's why it's creating me so many headaches, because it's such a hard and fun deck to put together. Because I do think there's a much better and much stronger version of Muldrotha than mine. But I made the decision long time ago that if I'm going to play Muldrotha, I'm going to do it graveyard style. So I've so many times tried to stray away from this, where I'm just going to do more card draw, because it doesn't really matter if you have the cards in hand or cards in the graveyard. You can cast them all the same with Muldrotha. But I keep coming back to, if I'm going to play Muldrotha, I'm going to play Muldrotha. And that means heavy self-mill and taking advantage of having so many cards in your graveyard that your opponents don't know how to stop you. Because even if they counter Muldrotha or remove it, you're just gonna try and do the same next turn.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, that's one of the things. I think we have maybe mentioned this before, but at looking at the list, I still have the feeling of this is one of those decks. I don't know what to call it, parasitic, but that's kind of how it feels playing against it, where at some point you will just have so much value that you will just take over the game no matter what. And I know most of the times when I sit down with the old version of your Muldrotha deck, I'm just thinking, please let's not go to turn 8 or 9, because then you just win and we won't be able to stop it, no matter how much interaction we have. And it seems like, based on this list, it still seems like that's the case for the deck. So I guess that's a Muldrotha thing more than a Decklist thing.
I think so. And I also think with inclusions of lands like Shifting Woodlands, now I have the option with Shifting Woodlands in play that just let Muldrotha go to the graveyard. And on my next turn, I'm not even casting it. I'm changing Shifting Woodlands into Muldrotha for 4 mana. So I'm avoiding the tax, and it can't be countered because it's not being cast. And it's just so many tools and flexibility in this sort of deck that it's really hard to counteract. I think there's so many fun cards, and I'm already running crop rotation because I want to be finding the Gaia's Cradle. But in some situations, I'm gonna find Shifting Woodlands instead, and try to do that.
Yeah, I think that's pretty nice. So now when you mentioned fun cards, I don't have so much more question about the deck in general, so I just wanted to ask if there is, like, what's the card inclusion that you included more for fun, or at least that's the favorite card, pet card, whatever you want to call it. Is there a specific one that comes to mind? I see a lot of cards that I wouldn't play, so...
Yeah, there are a few I probably shouldn't be running, or maybe there's just better inclusions. One of them is, of course, Asiatic Dream Render. This is an old favorite of mine, as you know. And I do think the better card here, and I actually ran both of them at some point, the better card here is probably just playing Opposition Agent, because it has flash. But I do like the Ashiok because, first of all, Opposition Agent doesn't mill myself. But I do also think that the graveyard has been becoming more and more dangerous in Bracket 4. You, of course, have your time deck, but there's just so many examples of people getting cards back from the graveyard one way or another. We also have a Zephyrus deck in our pot. We've seen Ashaton. We've seen a lot of inclusions where people are using the graveyards some way or another. And I do think that Ashiok coming with the exiling of the graveyard when you're using that minus ability is actually a big deal.
Yeah, also just for stopping random underworld breaches, even if it's not their main win con, people have a tendency just to put it in the deck. So removing 20 cards from a graveyard is still pretty relevant.
Yeah, I think so. And a card we've talked about a lot during these episodes, and we also just talked about it in our blue episode in the Color Pie series, that is Stifle. I had actually taken that card out of all of my decks, but it is sort of a pet card, and I do think that it helps me protect my own graveyard in a way that other spells can't do. So one of the cards we've seen a bit in our pot lately is Macabre. Is that what it's called, Macabre?
Fairy Macabre.
Fairy Macabre, yes. And that's a channel ability, or it's an activated ability on a card, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it is.
And Stifle actually helps here. It also works against Bajuka Box. We don't see a lot of those in our pot, to be honest, but it does help against a rare Bajuka Box. It helps against Soul Guide Lanterns, stuff where it's either a triggered ability or an activated ability. It could be Soul Cauldron, that we actually also see quite a bit in our pot at the moment, Agatha Soul Cauldron. Yeah. So I do have this as sort of a protecting a card or protecting my whole graveyard, and it also have the upside of, like a counter spell, you can both use it offensively and defensively. I actually think if I have this in my opening hand and I can stop my opponents from playing their first land, meaning that they play a fetch land, and I can just stop that because maybe they will play an Esper Sentinel or a Mystic Remora or something like that. I think I could actually just be an evil man and just use it there, because Stifle is one of those cards that can just end up rotting in your hand. You never know if you're gonna need it for protecting your own graveyard. So I actually think I would use it offensively if given the chance, to be honest.
Yeah, it kind of has that effect like Mental Misstep, where it's pretty good late game because you can stop some of the big, maybe Planeswalker Alt or something like that, but also have the early effect of removing something important.
Yeah.
And we have seen multiple times, people has a tendency nowadays to keep a hand with one land and a fish and then cross their fingers. So if they lose that one land, they're basically out of the game.
Yeah. I'm also trying, this is sort of bit of a pet card, but I also think it makes a lot of sense in this text, to be honest. But Chthonian Nightmare is a card I'm trying out again. With all the inclusion of all the 2-mana creatures, being able to sack one of them to get my Hermit Druid back that maybe hit the graveyard by one of the self-mills or something like that. I also just have the possibility early game, let's say I have it in my opening hand, I played Town Greeter to mill 4 cards and put 4 cards into my hand, but now I'm also, let's say, hitting the Valagia Archaeologist. Now I can just for 2 mana sack my Town Greeter and get Valagia Archaeologist back into my hand and sort of loop that self-mill. And of course it can get some of the important creatures back into hand, like Lotus Cobra or Aftermath Analyst, or maybe even my Phantasmal Image or Tiller Engine. There's so many cards that Chthonian Nightmare can just get back into play if I end up self-milling them some way.
Yeah, actually, when I looked at that card, that was one of the ones where I thought, okay, this seems pretty cool in this shell, also because of the problem, so to say, of you're making a lot of mana, and maybe sometimes you won't know what to do with it. So if you can pump like 6 or 8 mana into a Catonian Nightmare and looping some of the millers that can get you over the finish line and actually finish the game.
Yeah.
A turn earlier maybe than you possibly would. So I think that will be very interesting to see what it does. I think it will be strong.
I goldfished it a lot, but I've actually not gotten into any situations where I thought this would be helpful. But I have goldfished this deck and ran into the situations where if only I could get my Lumra back into my graveyard, then I could play him again, and then I could win because then I would have had enough mana. And that's actually also why I ended up including Altar of Dementia and Worn Soul Trader back into the deck, because I ran into a lot of situations where if only I could get a certain creatures back into my graveyard, I could probably win. And I also think that Worn Soul Trader with all the 2 mana creatures I'm running that doesn't really do anything after they hit the battlefield, except enabling Gaia's Cradle, of course. If I don't have that Gaia's Cradle in play, or maybe even if I do, I can tap the Gaia's Cradle, and now I can sack them to Worn Soul Trader and make even more mana. So yeah, that's the reason I ended up including those.
Yeah, it is an interesting push and pull with the sacrifice theme when you have a Gaia's Cradle, because you don't really want to do it, but you might need to do it to win the game. So that's also why Satona Nightmare I think is really cool, because it basically replaces the creature again, so you don't lose a creature in the transaction. So yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Then there's an old favorite of mine. I wouldn't call it a pet card, but it is an oldie, and I do think because of the mana value cost that it's sort of questionable if it's good enough, but that's Oracle of Moldiah.
Yeah, I think it is probably actually a bit underrated after we have seen what Ice Till can do. I know Ice Till does more and is a better card, but it is kinda in the same vein, and I remember the power of Oracle back in the day, so it should be pretty good in a deck that has a lot of mana.
What I found out is that I've added the Tutors Eldritch Evolution, so a lot of these 2 mana creatures that enters and self-mills, now I can Eldritch Evolution them into an Ice-Tail Explorer or an Oracle of Moldiah. For those reasons, I've added the Oracle of Moldiah because I will be finding the Ice-Tail Explorer first, but let's say I have that in hand, or maybe it's milled, or some other way I won't have access to it through Eldritch Evolution. Now I can go get the Oracle of Moldiah. And what I found out by goldfishing this deck is that if I do get the Oracle of Moldiah and Ice-Tail Explorer into play at the same time, which have happened quite a lot actually on like turn 3 and 4, now it's like playing 3 fetch lands out of your graveyard and you're milling, and if you have the Lotus Cobra also, now you're just like making 15, 16 mana on turn 4, and it actually does happen more than one would think. Now you're just in this magical Christmas land where, you're going to be playing Muldrotha and trying to win now.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. That's one of the cards where just you talking about my brain started spinning of is Ice-Tail Explorer a good hidden commander where I just copy him?
We talked about Ice-Tail Explorer in our green episode in the Color Pie series, and I just keep coming back to, well, if you have access to that fetch lane when you play him turn 3, let's say that, now he's only costing 3 mana, so he's really Reminab Excavator on steroids, to be honest. And if you have just a little bit of side theme where you're using the graveyard or something like that, it seems like such a good card.
Yeah, definitely.
And to be honest, that's also actually why I'm running Phantasmal Image, because making copies of Lotus Cobra or actually Ice-Tail Explorer, and now I can play freelance every turn, that's a lot of value.
And I want to mention some of because you mentioned Alto Dementia and some of the other stuff, maybe real quick, I was thinking that I can see that there is 25 creatures. How has it felt goldfishing? Do you feel like there is enough creatures for the Gaia's Cradle, or
that's actually a good question, because that was one of the things I was looking at, and I ended up deciding that if my whole plan was Gaia's Cradle, then it wouldn't be enough. But I'm also sort of in the situations where it's not really a Gaia's Cradle deck. It's not really where I make a lot of tokens and really exploit it. What I want my Gaia's Cradle to do is tap for 4 or 5 mana, then I'm pretty satisfied. Because if
Yeah.
I'm not trying to win on the turn, I do that, then I will probably try to win on my next turn, because now I have my setup where Guy's Cradle is tapping for 4 or 5 mana, and that's enough for playing the Lumra that activates my, let's say, Nissa. And yeah, it's gonna do enough in those situations where I don't have to be greedy. It's just have to make those 4 or 5 mana. It's enough. And like I said, it's not 100% Guy's Cradle plan. It's just one route. And because it's just one route and I'm not leaning heavily into that, I've just decided that 25 creatures is going to be enough.
Yeah, makes sense.
Also, because I am running all these creature tutors, you can see I'm running 11 tutors in this deck. If I cast one of these tutors early game, it will be to find Isle Explorer most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense that, like, what is it? 11 of your basically non-creature cards actually turns into a creature most of the time. So it's, even though you're only playing 25 creatures, you're kind of playing 10 more with the tutors if you exclude Soaring Microspawn, which is already a creature. So
yeah, and it's finding Guy's Cradle, and now it already taps for probably 2 or 3 mana.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I'm looking forward to see what it does.
You asked about the pet cards, and I just really want to mention quickly here that I'm trying Malevolent Rumble out in this deck. We talked about this maybe being an underplayed card in general in green. It makes this Eldrazi spawn that is good for your Guy's Cradle. And I actually do think that in some cases, this spell can end up being free.
Yeah, it's interesting. In Guy's Cradle, it's kind of free if you already have the Guy's Cradle, so since it creates a creature and taps for mana.
And I'm also running the Overlord of the Belmerk as sort of... I wouldn't call it a pet card in a self-mill deck, because it's actually one of the better cards when you self-mill, and it can get a creature back into your hand. But I like that one. And yeah, I'm running the Squandered Resources also. I might should be mentioning that. Squandered Resources and Aftermath Analyst and Shifting Woodlands also go infinite. And I do actually think that's a pretty easy setup for this deck. I will also say, and I do think this is quite important, because it's sort of a question I've been having in general the last year or so. I can't remember how old these lands are, but I'm running the Surveil lands because I am still running Amulet of Vigor and Tiller Engine for untappers. And I do this because I'm running the Aftermath Analyst and the Lumra. And you will get into situations where you can use the Aftermath Analyst effect, and you also have a Lotus Cobra effect in play, and now you're just getting double bubble from all the lands that you're getting back into play. But that is the Muldrotha deck at the moment. I will post a link in the description on how my list looks right now. I also run Jace the Perfected Mind still as both a value card and a win card, because with infinite mana and blinking Muldrotha with Displacer Kitten, that's also a way of just milling out my opponents. I want to have my win card closed down, meaning that I won't get into any situations where I don't have a way out if people have a one ring or something else in play where it hinders me in some way to trying to win. So having Jace the Perfected Mind and Thassa's Oracle of those sort of win cards is quite great. So I do think I have covered my bases. So if I get into the territory where I can generate infinite mana, I'm just gonna win. And I will say, you talked about playing the bad cards. What those cards also do, Town Greeter and those creatures, is that when you're trying to win as early as turn 5, having those creatures in play generate infinite mana. Now I can also blink those creatures. So they provide me infinite self-mill. And I have been in games where that was needed in order for me to get to the next step. Okay, now I have the mana. Now I need the cards. And blinking those creatures is a way of getting to those cards.
Yeah, it makes sense. It definitely was. We've seen multiple times. If you have infinite mill, you basically just win the game no matter what because of Lionside Diamond or stuff like that. So most of the time you just make infinite mana after that, and infinite mana and all your whole deck basically you win. So yeah, it makes sense. They're a bit more useful when you play the whole kitten setup.
I will say Warren Soul Trader is not a hard lock. That's making treasures. I am considering if Umbral Color Zealot is just good enough, because that is surveilling, which is giving me card advantage. I don't have an Umbral Color Zealot right now, so that's why Warren Soul Trader is in the deck. I'm probably considering, because I do think that the sack outlet is the important part and not if it's making mana, but that also remains to be seen. But in that case, I'm probably going with the Umbral Color Zealot down the line. Another card I'm also considering right now is Dozing the Falling Leaf. Having a creature that can just lock your opponents out of the game on my own turn is pretty powerful, I think. Also with the Eldritch Evolution and cards like that, maybe I can cheat it out somehow where you don't know what I'm going to get. Maybe you think I'm going for the Icedale Explorer or something like that, and now I'm going for Dozing the Falling Leaf because maybe I have secretly a Lion's Eye Diamond in hand and can try go for the win.
Yeah. Interesting you said with Umbral. I was actually, in my brain, I was changing Altar of Dementia for Umbral, but maybe not. I think I was just thinking of one more creature, easier to tutor. Kind of does the same. I know Altar of Dementia mills more cards, but yeah.
Yeah, it is sort of trying to divide those rare occasions where you have Muldrotha out for value, having the option to play an artifact or a creature out of the graveyard, and not always a creature can end up mattering.
Yeah, true.
So it's sort of just to split the value, having one creature and having one artifact, and it's sort of the same choice I've made with Tiller Engine and Amulet of Vigor, having one of each.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Also because you have Sotonian Nightmare, which is an enchantment, and also a Sack Outlet, so you have one of each. Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
But I could see down the line, because I haven't played this list yet that we're talking about right now. I'm playing it for the first time tomorrow. But I've goal-fisted a lot. I've goal-fisted like 100, 200 times. Maybe not 200, but close to 100 times. And the reason that Dozing the Falling Leaf isn't in the deck right now is that it seems like the games I have with it in hand, I don't have the mana for both playing that and trying to go for the win. So it's the option of playing it beforehand or maybe waiting another turn for trying to go for the win. And I think I would prefer to just try and go for the win and have you guys stop me. And maybe if you stop me, now I can still go for the win on next turn. But now I didn't have to wait. Now it's sort of, if I'm winning, I'm winning.
Kind of does
and
the same.
If not, I didn't lose anything. I can still try to go for the win because maybe I have Shifting Woodlands in play, or I can reanimate Muldrotha with an Animate Dead or something like that.
Yeah, because you're a Muldrotha deck, you don't care that much that you failing at winning because you can just try again. So it is not that important for that deck.
Yeah, I'm not sure those in this deck does that much.
Makes sense.
Any cards? I like you said in the beginning, you would build this deck entirely differently altogether. But in this deck I'm running, is there any cards you would do differently?
I can't really point out single cards because I think that you basically have close to the same setup as I would, or just different cards that does the same thing. I think the biggest difference for me, and that's something you know about me, I have a tendency to like pick one thing and then do that maybe too much. So basically, if I play Gaia's Cradle, I play 40 creatures and kind of kneecap myself sometimes. And that's like one of the big difference when I see this deck. You're like, oh, you're doing some Gaia's Cradle and you're doing some of that and this. And I'm like, okay, can we? So that's also why sometimes I have actually a hard time evaluating the decks because they are so different from how I would build it.
And that's actually a great point, I think, because it's one of the things I'm always trying to say to other people if they're asking for advice is don't try to do too much. Focus on one thing and do that great, because that's usually how you're going to win. But it's actually kind of a conscious choice in Muldrotha deck, because I think we talked a lot about when talking Muldrotha is that the deck is very telegraphed if you're playing the self-mill, because all of the cards are there for your opponents to see. And this is sort of a way to try and hide how am I going to win, because if I'm only doing it one way, it's like you guys are, hey, does he have Displacer Kitten and Lion's Eye Diamond in the graveyards? But in this setup, I have 3 or 4 ways I can try to swing the win. So it's going to be harder for you guys. You have to be more aware of what kind of cards do I have in the graveyard and how do they fit together. It's going to be more of a puzzle for you to see if I have the pieces I need to try and win. Or at least that was the thought or idea, whatever you want to call it, behind all the many ways that I can win and all the different routes I'm taking.
Yeah, and it makes some sense from the standpoint of this deck is not going to win first anyway in the pot most of the time. So when you get there, you really need to win the game. You can't just, it's not a turbo deck where you try it, turn 2, like, oh, whatever, I'll try again later. When you go for it, you need to actually do it.
Yeah.
Because then it's that late where everyone else is probably also going for it, so...
Yeah.
Yeah.
The deck is pretty much mana, self-mill, and then I will try to go for the win. It doesn't do a whole lot. It's not flashy turn 2, 3, and 4. It's mostly just playing lands and these low-value creatures. And I hope I can hide behind that and not look as big as a threat as I might be. That at least is the plan with it.
Yeah.
That was a little bit behind the deck of my Muldrotha. I would very much like to hear all your ideas, thoughts, and questions regarding Muldrotha in the comments. Maybe come and talk with us on our Discord server. We would be happy to have you. Maybe you have your own idea of a Muldrotha deck you would like to share. But until next time, thank you for tuning in.
Until next time, thank you for watching.